Hey, how's it going? It's all right. We got a good person today. Everybody somewhere good? Everybody online all right? Quick thing before I get started. Thanksgiving, you may have heard, is coming. We're actually having holidays still. Sometimes it doesn't look like it, but we are. And at our church, one of the things we do, we've got such a, I don't know, everybody's from everywhere, hardly anybody's from here. And so a lot of times if people aren't traveling for Thanksgiving, there's nobody that they know to spend time with. So we'll host a Thanksgiving dinner here in our facilities. And with them discouraging travel, there might even be more people than that. So we'll be having that again this year. I'll be working hard to make sure it's safe as possible. But we need you to let us know if you want to come. Don't have to do it right this second. But if you want to be part of our big Thanksgiving dinner that we'll have in the tent building, email office@spoutsprings.org. I don't know if there's a better email, I'm sure, but I don't know what it is. So just to let us know so we have the right number of stuff and everything's ready, all right? So just letting you know about that. When I was in college, I went to a different number of colleges picking up pieces as I prepared for ministry. And one of the colleges I took a class in, the seminary on, I took an Old Testament class to a professor who was agnostic. He wasn't convinced whether there was or wasn't a God. It's odd to take a class that way, but I did. And what he said specifically was he brackets God. He brackets the supernatural. He just takes the supernatural and he puts it in a room somewhere else in his life and just doesn't think about it. Doesn't wonder whether it's true, whether it's false, whatever. It's just over there, and he's going to live his life without ever really concerning himself with whether there's a God or not. And that sounds odd in general to me. It also sounds very odd for a professor of the Bible, but that's him. But here's the thing. An awful lot of Christians tend to bracket things. We do things like that too, things that we're uncomfortable with. Matter of fact, this entire series called disBELIEF is a lot of it is about things that we bracket, the things we just don't want to talk about, but we really should. Like, for instance, today, there are things in the Bible. I mean, I'm a big Bible fan, but there are parts of it, and there are sections, and there are verses that make me go a little, I just soon pretend that one wasn't here. Like, let me show you this. This is in 2 Samuel. And in 2 Samuel, it's pretty self-explanatory. King David defeated the Moabites, a nation around them. Then he made their soldiers lie down on the ground, and he measured them off with a rope. So they're laid out like this, and he'd just take his rope and he'd measure off, okay? He'd measure off 2 lengths of rope and have those men killed. Yeah, it just said that. And he'd measure 1 length and let those men live. So he would go through the entire army that they had captured and killed 2/3 of them. Now, I've not studied the Geneva Convention, but I'm pretty sure that's not something we would say was a good thing. Sounds pretty weird to capture people and then kill 2/3 of them. And that's the man after God's own heart. That's weird. Now, one way you can come out and explain to that and say, well, the Bible doesn't always record what God says. Sometimes it just records what people did. I mean, God spoke through the Word of God, and we believe very strongly in the inspiration of the Bible that holy men of God wrote as they were moved by the Spirit of God, so that what they spoke was God-breathed. But sometimes it's just reporting. It's not saying you should do this. So it's not saying we should, it's sort of like a guy a reporter who reports on an arson probably didn't set the fire. So it could be that for this. And it's weird that God would do it, I'm not encouraging you to do your devotions out of that one. Next time you're journaling, that may not be the place to go in the morning to get inspiration, but it's in there, and it's challenging, but we can kind of explain it, sort of, But there are harder ones that have some of the same problems. This is in Deuteronomy, and God is giving instructions to the Israelites. The Israelites have come out of Egypt. They've now spent 40 years in the wilderness. They're getting ready to go into the promised land. God says, I'm giving you this land, what we would call Israel now. I've given you this land, and you're to take possession of it, and it's going to be your space. You guys get this land. All this dirt is yours. And he's telling them how to do it in Deuteronomy. And God says, when you march up to attack a city, make its people an offer of peace. If they accept and open their gates, all the people in it shall be subject to forced labor and shall work for you. Well, that's cheery. If they accept, if they surrender before you get there, they get to be slaves. If they refuse to make peace and they engage you in battle, lay siege to that city, and when the Lord your God delivers it into your hand, put to the sword all the men in it. I'll just kill all the dudes. As for the women, the children, the livestock, everything else in the city, you may take those as plunder for yourselves. And that's for the cities far away. And then it says this, a couple verses down. Now, this is how you treat all the cities that are at a distance from you, that don't belong to the nations nearby. So, in other words, when you're going out to war. But what about when you're taking over the cities right there? You're moving into Israel. You're getting ready to take out the cities in Israel. How should you treat those people in Canaan? However, in the cities of the nations the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them. The Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, termites, Malachites, everything. Stalactites, stalagmites, anything. As the Lord your God has commanded you. Otherwise, they will teach you to follow all the detestable things they do in worshiping their gods, and you will sin against the Lord your God. But did you see that, what it said? Let's see if I get the right verse there. However, in the cities of the nations the Lord your God is giving you as inheritance, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Okay, now, that's hard. That's hard to get my head around. It's hard to, how do I reconcile that with God? How do I raise my, because, we want to bracket that. We want to ignore that. I'm pretty sure you've probably never been in church and that verse been brought up as the key text for the sermon. And I want to bracket and I want to ignore it, but there are some good reasons not to ignore the hard parts. For one thing, if you have children or when you have children, and you ignore and bracket the hard parts of the Bible, there will come a time when they will be exposed to those. Might be online, it might be on a YouTube video, it might be when they go to college, it might be when they go off to work, it may be they run into a cynic somewhere, and that person's going to say, you really shouldn't believe in Christianity, and here's why. They killed every soul in those cities. Or you might be witnessing to somebody. You might be telling somebody about your faith. You might be inviting somebody to church. Our church is cool. You can come. It's a welcome home. It's everybody come as you are kind of thing. It's great, great. Do they believe this? So this series and the way that I personally am wired, we don't get to skirt these. We don't get to run away from the hard passages. We don't run away and say, well, that's something else from another. No, that's in the Bible. When we say the Bible is God-breathed, it includes that verse. So how do we deal with passages like that? And it's not the only one where God comes across as being incredibly mean and angry and violent. How do we deal with those passages? How do we deal with that thought? I've got a few things we're going to walk through today. Now, one of them, it actually we go back to David measuring off and killing 2/3 of his soldiers of the enemy. One thing we've got to understand is that we don't understand their culture or their customs. We're dealing with a very weird world. Our world is the way it is, and we're used to it. Now, I will guarantee you that if you bring somebody from let's say you could go into a tribe, one of those undiscovered, there are still a few people on earth that haven't been in contact with us, and you brought them to America, they would go back home and go, they're weird. Those Americans are just... So anytime you're dealing with a really foreign culture, they seem weird. Now, there's a couple things about the culture that are going to help us understand that passage that we just read. And one of them is to understand that culture was a very violent culture. I mean, if you're going to lay out all the soldiers and kill 2/3 of them and nobody even raise an objection, you're in a violent culture. There was a group of people called the Ninevites. They lived in a city called Nineveh. That's why they were called Ninevites. And they were known in their whole nation for skinning people alive. If they caught you and you weren't doing what they wanted you to do, they literally got a paring knife and peeled you. Okay? Remember, this culture in general, and the general concept of things, is the culture that invented crucifixion. It's the exact opposite, by the way, of the guillotine. If you remember the story of the guillotine was invented by a Frenchman who said, I want to find a very humane way to execute criminals. The crucifixion was invented as a very inhumane way to execute people so that everybody else would straighten up. And it was a very violent culture. And one reason it was really violent was because it was what I call a non-image culture. They didn't believe people were made in the image of God. They had all kinds of weird, capricious gods, and they didn't have a single God, and they didn't believe anybody was made in the image of God. And that shows in how they treat people. It didn't matter how you... Matter of fact, can I give you this as a free gift for coming here or being part of our online campus? One of the best things about America that we don't even talk about is that we still believe in the image of God in people. Now, we don't admit it. We don't call it that. Our culture doesn't say that. But if you watch how we talk about individuals, we always talk about individuals, no matter where you are on the spectrum of politics or atheism or theism or whatever, everybody in America still believes that humans are special, that there's something valuable in them. And that comes from our belief in the image of God. If you go to a culture worldwide that doesn't believe in the image of God, you will see people who treat people very, very, very differently. Matter of fact, cruelly, because they don't believe in the image of God. The image of God makes people think better about other people, okay? So this is a culture that doesn't believe in the image of God, that's very, very violent. And this part's where we're going to spend some time on this one. It was what I would call a bravado culture. They like shock and awe. They like saying things mean. They like something that we have trouble with. A lot of times Christians have trouble with this concept, the concept of hyperbole. Hyperbole is overstating a case to get your point across. Hyperbole is you're getting ready to fight with somebody and you say, I'm going to hit you so hard your children's teeth are going to be loose. Okay? Hyperbole is I'm going to rip off your left arm and beat you to death with it. Okay, that's hyperbole. It's way overstating. I am more powerful than you, and I am going to destroy you. And we do that in game, right? Our sports is all about hyperbole. We're going to annihilate them. Well, last time I looked, there'll be NFL games today, and I'm pretty sure even if the final score is 72-0, every member of the other team is going to survive the event. Right? They don't but it's hyperbole. It's overstating. And Christians have trouble there. But God said... God uses hyperbole. God overstates for effect. And I know a lot of you Christians are tightening up. Now, you're pinching everything. God, you mean he doesn't, God uses hyperbole, and I'm going to prove it to you without any doubt. Jesus said, and those of you who have been Christians for any time at all have probably heard this story that Jesus told us, this teaching of Jesus. And Jesus said, if your right eye offends you, pluck it out. In other words, if your right eye is leading you to sin, get rid of your eye. Poke your eye out if it's leading you to sin. What kind of sin? Well, what kind of sin comes with the eye? Well, one of them is looking at, if you're a dude, looking at women that way. Okay? That's what that would mean. Look at women. If you look at women this way, if you are tempted to sin by looking at women sexually who are not your spouse, pluck your eye out. Jesus said that. Now, I'm not going to make guys raise their hands. Well, I could almost. Are there any guys in this room who do not have a problem with that? Are there any guys? I've been around a little bit. I'm waiting to meet the first straight guy who doesn't have trouble with how he looks at women. I'm waiting. If you're that way, email me. I would love to meet you. I would love for you to explain how you do that. But dudes look at women that way. Okay? So, every dude has this problem. Jesus says, if you have this problem, poke out your eye. Now I want everybody to look around the room at all the one-eyed men in the room. Obviously, we all interpret that as hyperbole, as Jesus overstating to make the case of how big a deal it is to train yourself not to look at women that way or to look away and to train your brain in that area. Obviously, he's overstating the case to get you to behave. because, boy, do we need help behaving. Next time we have a woman speak, she can give you a woman's example, but that's the dude example, okay? So hyperbole, bravado, shock and awe was part of the culture. Saying things outstandingly in order to get everybody's attention. So it's possible when he says, do not leave alive anything that breathes, he doesn't mean you have to kill all the iguanas. I don't know how beetles breathe, right? They weren't. Matter of fact, we'll look in a little bit, they weren't even killing very many of the people. So just maybe that bravado culture is them speaking in a way that gets people to react and maybe scares some people out of fighting them. And one final one, this is the important, big one. They're a violent culture, a non-image culture, bravado culture. They were also an identity culture. That's where they differ from us so significantly, because Americans are about me. Me, myself, and I are my most important three people in my life. I mean, we say differently. I mean, we make really good statements about how much we care for others, but really, it starts with us. And if the other people, they got to be really close to us to even get into the zone. We're about me. That's who we are. They were about us. They were about their culture. They were about the city they lived in. The community you lived in would have certain gods. Religion was tied into it, so every community had its own gods. So if you went to fight a certain city, they had a certain version of Molech or a certain version of Balaam or a certain version of Ashtoreth, and they worshiped as a community, and so their identity was tied up in their worship and their location. And they thought of themselves more as being part of the group than being an individual. We start out thinking of ourselves as an individual who may or may not be part of a group and may switch groups throughout our lifetimes. They thought of themselves first and foremost as part of a group, okay? And so when he says this, with that in mind, completely destroy them, the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded, then maybe that word destroy, maybe it's about destroying the concept of being a Hittite, Amorite, Canaanite, Perizzite, Hivite, Jebusite, Termite, Stalactite, Stalagmite. Because the word destruction in Hebrew, if you're a Hebrew lesson of the day, I know you came just for a Hebrew lesson, the word is the word harem. Harem, actually. You got to kind of get back in there and get that Hebrew thing going and clear your throat a little bit. Harem. But I'm just going to say harem because I can only do that so long without messing up my throat. The word harem, the point isn't destruction of individuals, but destruction or transformation of identity, okay? Because, why? Well, let me give you the best example of harem in our culture. It's ironic that this culture in our history, recent history, relatively recent history, will be World War II. World War II, who were the bad guys? The Nazis, right? They were the bad guys. I mean, everybody admits they're the bad guys. What did the Allies do as soon as the war was over to get rid of the Nazis? Did they take every individual who had been part of the Nazis and line them up and kill 2/3 of them and let 1/3 live? No. Best I can tell, right? If they were a regular soldier or they were just a member of the Gestapo, even a member of the Gestapo, they were allowed to, okay? What did the Allies do? We took their flag and we took the swastika off of it and gave them a different flag. We also cut them up into like 3 or 4 states to try to help with that too. We eliminated the concept Nazi from being acceptable because that was the identity. And if you take away the identity, you take away a lot of the power. So the countries knew that, so they took away the word Nazi. So there are still Germans. They're just not Nazi Germans. To tell you how powerful the identity concept is, when somebody wants to go uber racist, what do they pull out? A swastika. Because they want to grab that image and reappropriate it for themselves and for their group, so they'll pull a swastika out because the identity is powerful. And so when the war was over, we eliminated the identity of being part of Nazi Germany. We didn't eliminate Germans. Does that make sense? So what God is speaking to them and saying is, while there is a fair amount of violence, I want to eliminate the identity of Hittite and Amorite and whatever ites you want to use. Because why? Because it came at the end of the text. Otherwise, they will teach you to follow all the detestable things they do in worshiping their gods, and you will sin against the Lord your God. If there are still people who call themselves Hittites, they will train you to worship the Hittite gods. So we can't have any more Hittites. Now, did they kill all the Hittites? Well, no. No. Matter of fact, let me give you a couple things that they did. God told them to destroy all the cities. You got to go through and destroy all the cities. You know how many cities they destroyed? It's on the board. 3. They took out the city of Jericho, the city of Ai, and the city of Hazor. They got rid of those. They were fortress cities. They destroyed them. The rest of the cities, you know what they did? They walked in with their army, said, shoo. If they shooed, and they moved in and took over the city. So the Israelites took over the cities one at a time. They didn't kill all the people. Matter of fact, most of the people didn't even live in cities. It's called agricultural economy. Where do farmers live? Yeah, how many farmers you got in your subdivision? I'm talking real farmers, not somebody who thinks raising chickens is somehow cool. I grew up on a farm. Raising chickens isn't cool. Okay, it's just raising chickens. But anyway, that's not part of the sermon. Okay? There are no farmers in your subdivision because farmers don't live in subdivisions. Farmers live on, this is tough, farmers live on farms. And most of the people there made a living working farms. And if you work a farm, you don't sleep in the city, get up in the morning, and go out to your farm because you've got to be on your farm first thing in the morning. So you live as close to your farm as is possible. In other words, you live on your farm. Even if you're a hired employee, you live next door to the farm you work on. So when they get everybody out of the cities, it's hard on taxi drivers. Thankfully, they hadn't invented taxis yet, so it wasn't as bad as it could have been. It's not that hard on farmers. Okay? So they only destroyed 3 cities. The people primarily didn't live in cities. And there's no mention of them hunting down survivors. There's no mention that they went in and captured this city, and then they spent 3 days hunting down everybody who escaped from the city. If you escape from the city, cool. If you fight us, we'll take you out. But they didn't kill the iguanas. They didn't kill the beetles. And they didn't kill all the people. Okay? Matter of fact, in Exodus, which is before this thing here, Exodus, God is talking about eventually you're going to go to the Holy Land, the Promised Land, and you're going to get rid of the people. And here's what it says in Exodus 34. Okay, the Lord said, "I'm making a covenant with you before all your people. I will do wonders never before done in any nation in the world." And so he talks about how he's going to do this, and he talks about, and skip down a couple verses. He says, "Obey what I command you today, and I will drive out before you. I will drive out before you the Amorites, Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites." Okay? But listen to what he says next about how to handle this. "I'm going to get rid of all of them. Be careful not to make a treaty with those who live in the land." Make a treaty? You don't make treaties with dead folk, right? There are still people in the land. He's saying it. You're going to go through and you're going to take possession of the land, but they're still going to be there. If you do make a treaty, there'll be a snare among you. It does say this: break down their altars, smack their sacred stones, cut down their Asherah poles. Eliminate their religious identity so they cannot tempt you to following the false gods. But, there is an assumption that there are going to be people there. Matter of fact, let me. This is something as I was working on this, it hit me. I'd never thought of this before. If you're ever wanting to have a fun little thing to do with your YouVersion Bible app, this is a fun little trick to do. You take it, you make sure you're the NIV translation or the ESV translation, and you search on the word foreigner. But foreigner with an asterisk on the end. That way you'll get foreigner and foreigners. And you'll be shocked at how many verses are in the Bible that talk about how to treat foreigners. Which is interesting, because if they chased everybody out, where are the foreigners coming from? There wouldn't be that many of them. See, foreigner doesn't just mean people who moved in. It means people who are still there. And so there's people who are still Hittites, or who were Hittites and Jebusites. There's even rules about how to go about when you intermarry with them. There's all kinds of stuff in there about how to make sure they don't give you their identity. Okay? Are we following this? Let me put it this way. The Israelites were instructed to destroy the Canaanites' culture and religious identity so they'd not be a temptation. That's what's going on. When he says everything that breathes, he means to scare them. It's hyperbole. It's overstatement for the point of getting them to take it seriously enough that they don't leave the identity of the Canaanites in place. Does that make sense? Is everybody following this? I know it's weird. I know it's just strange. It's not what you're used to hearing. But the reality is, while there were things that they did that we would call wrong, there was no genocide. There was none of that going on. This was God taking out, because in addition to the fact they had to take possession of the land, we have a problem with another thing. There's something else. We have a trouble with that whole concept there we just talked about. But we're uncomfortable with judgment. Because not only were they taking possession of the land, they were also executing God's judgment on these people, because they had done some bad stuff. Leviticus 18 said, "Do not defile yourselves in any of these ways, for the people I'm driving out before you have defiled themselves in all these ways." According to archaeologists and people who study it, the people they were judging were some really nasty people. Have you ever noticed that what one person will do will be bad, but what a riot of people will do can go terrible? One person does one bad thing. If you're in a crowd, that person convinces the next person to do something worse, which convinces the next person. Ever seen that? There are things that you would never consider doing unless you're in a group, and suddenly in the group, and anybody here, don't raise your hand, done anything because you were part of a group that you'd never even have considered on your own? But you're with a group, and one person in the group did something, and then the next person in the group did something, and the next thing you're caught up in what they're doing, and you're doing things that you're just massively ashamed of, that you've never ever have done you never have thought of them on your own, but then you're caught up in the group. That happened in Canaan. That happened in the Promised Land. Here's what one scholar says about it. He says the Canaanites were marked by the worst possible aspects of slavery, religious prostitution, and sexual cults. Mix all those together in a smoothie, and you got something nasty. Scholars have called the Canaanite cult religion the most sexually depraved of any in the ancient world, which is quite a statement. It was human trafficking. It was prostitution. It was taking advantage of children. It was nasty, nasty stuff. And God had seen enough, and God wanted to judge, and he brought in the Israelites to judge. So there was a part of this that was judgment. But we don't like judgment. We need to get back. We like the concept of justice. We don't like the reality. We don't like when it gets hard. We don't like when it's complicated, when it's difficult. Let me see if I can help you understand that. Let's say a person commits a very violent crime, and the legal ramification is the death penalty. We'll put him in a state where it's legal, and we'll say this person did it. There is no doubt about it. They did it on YouTube. I mean, it is completely no doubt about it. This person did it. It is the definition of a death penalty crime in that state, and for the sake of argument, we will say that you are pro-death penalty. Just whether you are or not, for my illustration, I need you to follow along with me. This is a crime that is violent, that is documented, and that is definitely in the line of death penalty cases, and you are pro-death penalty, and it's your brother. We like judgment over there. We like judgment with people we don't know. But all of us, when judgment reaches a certain level, all of us have a line. Now some of you guys, I've talked to some of you guys got a line on judgment that's like, pretty far out there. But for most of us, there's a line where we're not real comfortable with people receiving the due recompense of their actions. We have lines. We have where we don't want to go with that because it's challenging and it's hard, and our mercy. I think everybody in the room, almost everybody in the room has some mercy. And we have a line, and we hit that line, and we don't want to do it. But the reality is that God's a God of justice, and justice requires punishment. Here's in Exodus 34, verse 7. God does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sins of the parents to the third and fourth generation. And that's one of those other things. Why are the children getting punished? Because they get punished. Okay, it's not like God chooses that one. Some of you guys you grew up in that. You're carrying the punishment of your parents and your grandparents with you right this minute. Because they committed certain sins and you carry the marks. Does that make sense? That part right there is not God saying, yeah, I'm going to do this. This is what happens. So I punish to stop it so it doesn't continue from generation to generation to generation. And the fact is, let me just put this up here. A just universe requires judgment. Somebody has to pay for it. We know this. We know that somebody has to pay the penalty for sin. Let me give you two heinous sins, and you'll know what I'm talking about. Two heinous, absolutely heinous sins. Number one, cutting me off in traffic. And number two, cutting in front of me in line. Right? We know in our core those are wrong. I don't have to try to explain it to you. I don't have to go to the biblical verses that would support it. In your heart and in your gut, you know those things are wrong. And you know that in a just universe, something bad should happen. When the person cuts you off in traffic, they really should, at the very least, get caught at every red light for the rest of the day. You know, maybe a blowout on 2 tires at once, or something. There should be judgment that should come into play when somebody cuts me off in traffic, right? Everybody knows this. We all believe that judgment should come for things that are done wrong. And the reality is that judgment means somebody has to pay for it. Let's take something that is like among the most minor violations. Let's take a parking ticket. A parking ticket. Somebody has to pay for a parking ticket, right? We went to Pennsylvania to drop off my daughter in Philadelphia a few months ago. And if you go to big cities and if you're not used to that city, there'll be places you can park for these 15 minutes, but not for these 15 minutes. I'm saying and so where her apartment was, the one side of the street you could park almost all night long, but you had to move the car by 5 in the morning. Anybody know me? What are the odds I'm going to move a car by 5 in the morning? Anybody? Yeah, there's a ticket on the car when we come out. Right? So I've got to pay this ticket that I got on my... Wait a second. I forgot. We took Nikki. Nikki when Nikki's car is nicer than ours, so we drove Nikki's car because it's got really good acceleration, and I could go up in the city traffic. We had Nikki's car. And so they sent the ticket, and it didn't have my name on it. The ticket went to Nikki. It had Nikki's name on it. So legally, Nikki owed the city of Philadelphia, I think it was like $30. Philadelphia is an expensive little city to get a parking ticket in, for parking in the wrong spot. Nikki had a ticket for $30. And if there's justice, Nikki has to pay that unless she's got a really cool dad. Right? Because the city of Philadelphia, it turned out, had no objection to me going online and paying for Nikki's ticket. They didn't complain about it. They didn't throw a fit about it. They didn't even care. As long as somebody paid for it, that's all that mattered. So are you guys with me on this one? When somebody does something wrong, justice means somebody has to pay for it, period. I was bringing this up when we were teaching through Revelation in one of my Bible studies, teaching that sin, violating God's principles, always has a payment and somebody has to pay it. Now, thankfully, as a Christian, who pays ours? Jesus is always a safe answer, folks. Come on. Right? Jesus pays our tickets. Jesus pays when we accept Christ. We ask here his forgiveness. Jesus pays, but there's still justice because Jesus took the penalty. Jesus paid the penalty. Now, if Jesus pays the penalty for people who ask him to, what happens to people who don't ask him to? Who pays their tickets? Justice means they pay their own ticket. The wages of sin is death. Okay? So just because some of us have chosen to accept Jesus' payment and let him pay for our sins doesn't mean there doesn't need to be justice for the other things in the universe. Jesus didn't make all the payments for everybody for all time, or at least not appropriate for everybody for all time. And so we recognize that we sin and fall short of the glory of God, and that somebody has to pay for that. The wages of sin is death. Somebody has to pay for that. Jesus dies for my sins, and so there is still justice in the universe. But people who reject Jesus, we don't like to think about judgment, but the reality is if it's a just universe, rejecting God means there is payment. And that brings us very smoothly, I think. I think I did okay on this transition. To one of the reasons we are challenged by those verses is a good reason. Because we understand the primacy of grace. We understand the priority, how important grace is. And when we come into a situation in the Bible where it looks like God is being harsh, it is really hard on us because we get a little bit afraid. See, if you went back to those days, to those people, their gods were capricious and mean. You never know what they were going to do. We have a God who is not capricious, who is consistent and reliable. And we really want him to be gracious all the time because we depend on his grace. Are we right? Okay. And so that's why in Exodus 34, we've been working our way backwards, in case you hadn't noticed, in Exodus 34. And now we're at the first verse of the section. God is talking about himself. And he says, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. See, God is a gracious, forgiving God. And if you read the Bible, one of the reasons we can bracket, or we sometimes tend to bracket, when God's not acting that way is because there's so much where he is. One of my favorite stories about that is the book of Jonah. You know, Jonah with the whale and all that stuff. That's not the best part of the book. That's just a filler. The best part of the book is God sends Jonah to Nineveh. Nineveh is the place where they skinned people alive. They were evil people. And Jonah doesn't want to go. And the reason Jonah doesn't want to go is because he knows God. He knows God really well. And he knows what's going to happen. He's going to go to the people of Nineveh and he's going to say, God's going to judge you. Prepare to get zapped. But he's got a big fear. What if they repent? What if they turn to God? And that's what happened. The people of Nineveh repented and turned to God, and God forgave them and withheld the judgment. Let me just read you the verse. When God saw what they did, the Ninevites did, and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring on them the destruction he had threatened. Matter of fact, you can go to the book of Jeremiah, the prophet, and there's a point where God comes to Jeremiah and says, hey, don't you pray for these people. Yeah, don't pray for them, because I am ticked and I am going to judge them. They have earned judgment, but if you pray for them, my mercy side's going to pop back out and I'm going to forgive them again, and I don't want to forgive them. You ever been like that? I don't want to forgive them this time. And God was like, I don't want to forgive the Israelites this time. They've done too much, so don't you pray for them. Okay? Because God's nature is grace. God's nature is mercy. He is required by his own personality to enact justice, for there to be justice and judgment. That is a requirement because of God's nature. And the universe would be screwed and weird if there wasn't justice. But his default setting is mercy. And we know God. Let me put this in perspective for you. We are now almost empty nesters. We have a college daughter who's back in for Thanksgiving right now, but basically we have a house that's ours. If you don't have that yet, that is a wonderful thing, okay? It is our house, which means things like we don't have as much space problems as we used to, even our house is smaller. We can do things like, this is true, you're not going to believe this, we have his and her silverware drawers. Not making that up, it is a true statement. See, we moved into the new house, and we gave most of our silverware to our kids because they needed, each of them was setting up their household and stuff. So we gave Dominique some to take to Pennsylvania, and we got rid of most. We had just a few, and we couldn't find the rest of it. Somehow, you ever lose anything while moving? Yeah, we did. And so Kim went to buy silverware. She missed the first part of the word where it says silver. You guys who know my wife, she's singing today. She's the one with purple hair. Okay? My wife loves color. Color is who she is. So when she goes to buy utensils to eat with, what do you think she's looking for? Color. So she finds these plastic candled things that look sort of like forks and knives and spoons. Okay? But They're plastic handled. How do you eat a steak with a plastic handled fork? I don't think that's how God intended it to work. And the spoons are these tiny little, they're like baby food spoons. It's like, oh God, and I'm looking at this going, we're in the new house and I'm going to have to eat with these for the rest of my life. How can I possibly hold my head up as a man eating a steak with a pink fork? I have some pride. So we're walking through, I think it was Ollie's, and Ollie's has a whole bunch of, at the time, a bunch of silverware there, and some of them, something you could eat a steak with. Silverware the way God intended it. Strong and sturdy and powerful. So we bought it. It wasn't expensive. We brought it home. There was a drawer over here. We put mine are here. Hers are here. All that to say, I know my wife. There was no way I was going to talk her into forsaking the pink spoons for the real ones. She's going to be happily using those pink. Did I tell you that each one is a different color? The big spoons are yellow. The little spoons are blue. Oh, gosh. But I know her. She's not going to forsake that. I've known my wife for a long time. I have figured her out when it comes to a lot of things. She may be confusing in certain areas, but there are certain things I've figured out. Like, for instance, if I see my wife wearing brown, something bad has happened. Either where she works at the school where she's a teacher, they're having some sort of a day and they're required to wear brown, or something's wrong if she's wearing brown, because I know my wife. I know what her intrinsic nature is. I've spent enough time with her that I know her intrinsic nature is not brown. Okay? I have spent enough time with God to know that his intrinsic nature is grace. That his base nature is love and mercy. That while he is a just God and he will carry out things that, to my perspective, sometimes seem a little bit wrong, I know that's not the base. And I can't let the verses that seem to point to God wearing brown define him in my eyes. I can't let them deter me, because I don't understand everything God does. And some things, I'm not bracketing it, but I'm willing to say I don't understand it. Do I fully understand everything about the Canaanite taking over that land, the way that God did it, the way the people did it? Do I fully understand? No. I can find reasons that make it easier to get my head around a little bit, and I'm willing to confront that. But I'm also willing to say that my God is a God of grace and love and mercy, and that I can't turn that off while I'm studying these passages. That I have to turn it on and put it on there in a bright light and say that however God is doing it, there is an element of mercy, there is an element of love, even if I can't see it. If my wife's wearing brown, there's a good reason for it. Doesn't change who she is as a person. Does that make sense? And I need that. I need God to be merciful because I know how badly I need mercy. I need God to be a God who, when I confess my sins, is faithful and just to forgive me of my sins and cleanse me of all unrighteousness every time, because I sin a lot. I don't know if you thought that the preacher was perfect. Well, you're in the wrong place, man. I am the most screwed up pastor you're going to meet. Okay? Well, maybe not but I'm in the top 10. And I need God's grace. I require God's grace. And I have spent enough time with God that I know. I've spent enough time in his word to know that his default setting is mercy. His default setting is grace. And so I can look at a passage like this and I can say, I don't fully understand it. I know the culture, getting the culture understanding, that helps me. Understanding my own queasiness towards judgment, that helps me. But I know my God is a God of grace. I know that Jesus came and took all my sins on the cross so he could pay the penalty for my sin. I know that every bit of it is grace. I know, for it's by grace I've been saved through faith, not of myself. It's a gift of God, not of works, so that no one, especially Steve, can boast. So I can look at the tough passages. I can wrestle with the tough passages. I can say, yeah, God, I don't fully understand why you did that way. But the overall picture that I have, the complete message I have, says that's the part I need to explain. That's the weird thing, not the normal thing. Does that make sense? And so when I invite somebody to have a relationship with Christ, that's what I'm inviting them to. I'm inviting them to a party of grace. A party where God has taken the sins, all of my sins, and laid them on Jesus on the cross. And Jesus paid the penalties. Jesus paid my tickets. Every one of my tickets, and a lot of them are worth a lot worse than parking tickets. And Jesus paid all of those for me. And Jesus either paid all of those for you, or he wants to pay all of those for you. And if you'd like to talk to somebody about having that relationship with Christ, about getting him to pay your parking tickets, as it were, what we ask you to do is grab one of these blue bags. If you're in the auditorium, there's someone on the corner of the platform there and there. There's some on the back tables. And if you grab a blue bag, we'll connect you with somebody here in the auditorium who's trained, and they'll take 7 to 10 minutes and show you how to have that relationship with Christ. Now, for those of you watching online, if you're watching live, you should be in a room, a chat room kind of thing, where you can just raise your hand or get somebody's attention, and they can talk to you about having a relationship with Christ. If you're watching on delay, just email steve@spoutsprings.org, and I will set you up, and we'll take care of this for you, because we think it's really important that people have a relationship with Christ, that people let Christ pay their parking tickets. Okay? Now, if you have a relationship with Christ, the next step is, of course, to be baptized. We do baptisms. Right now, we do them on Sunday mornings. We just pull a baptistry right there, and we do it. We did it last week on the 11 o'clock service. If you want to do that, just email baptism@spoutsprings.org. We'll set you up online or live. Okay? If you'd like to connect with our church in a stronger way, some people call it membership, we call it partnership, or if you'd just like to talk about who we are, where we came from, where we're going, what we do right now is we just set up a meeting with me, because why not? And so it'll take a little while, maybe at least an hour. But we'll talk about who you are, where you're going in your walk with Christ. We'll also talk about our church, where our church has come from, and where we're going, and what we believe and what's important. And if you want to partner with us, we give you that opportunity and be part of our community, our family of faith. If you want to do that, that's steve@spoutsprings.org. That'll work. If you're here in the auditorium, for those of you here in the auditorium, during this next song, it may be a good time to think about, if there's something you want to think about or pray about, we've got a cross in the corner over there. And during the next song, that's there so that during this song, if you want to go pray about something, you can. If you'd like to take communion, we've got a communion station right there as well. Nice, safe, secure, sanitized little communion packets. If you're online, for those of you who are online, I encourage you every week to take some time right now to process what you've learned, to don't just turn off the thing and run away, but to process it, and maybe take some time in prayer and be ready for that and do that. But anyway, the Bible's got some weird stuff in it. It does. I'm not going to bracket it. I'm not going to ignore it. But there's one non-weird thing that flows through the whole process, and that's grace. And that's what I want you to apply to your life today. Can I pray for you? Father, thank you for today. Thank you for your grace and your love and your mercy. Help us to live that out, to accept it, to share it. Father, we also want to take a little bit of time to pray for our military, the ones that are far away from home, either on deployment or TDY. Pray for them. Help them to experience your grace today in a real way. Keep them safe and bring them home soon. And Father, help us to be agents of your grace as we go out. Help us to be agents of your grace and your mercy and your love, and to share that with others. That's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.